said that the average American's attention span is now less than 8 seconds. Lengthy emails are discarded by 43% of us within the first 30 seconds, and that long-winded coworker peer makes it all of about 15. Now, some of you sharper audience members may be realizing I'm quickly approaching these time limits myself. I credit the nature of TED Talks to your attention still and the expectations you had walking through the door. And for those of you whose attention I'm perhaps about to lose, I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick spoiler to hopefully recapture and maintain your attention throughout. Now, the personal story I'm going to be using today to relate to my idea involves that of witnessing the decision of a man to walk into a church sanctuary with a shotgun and open fire upon the congregation. But in order to feel the full effect of this particular story of mine, I'm going to ask that you refrain from checking to see what just made your phone vibrate, or trying to figure out what that guy in front of you keeps doing with his hands, and really listen. We live in a society ruled by the technological advancements that constantly demand and employ our attention. We experience everything through the vastness of the internet and the proliferation of cameras that are ready to document anything of the slightest interest. And yet we simultaneously experience nothing. Flooded by a world of news information that focuses on extremes in order to hold our attention, we numb ourselves to feeling the effect of these stories. And how can we allow this to happen? After all, we have bills to pay and families to provide for, papers to write and resumes to build, things that require our constant daily attention, and that we cannot simply discard in light of an event that doesn't directly concern us. So instead, we receive that CNN update. We click a link on a tweet, and we read a summary in order to get the general gist of what occurred. Now, this ensures maximal knowledge with minimal incited emotion, something our world of 140 characters and 8-second sound bites is getting quite good at. But occasionally, something does come along in these stranger stories and sticks around in our head for a while. We refer to this as striking a chord, and it tends to come in the form of a single detail or fact that we simply can't get out of our heads. What stands out about the 2012 Aurora shooting in Colorado is that it occurred during a Batman movie premiere. Now, while we may not remember the names of the victim, or the perpetrator, or even the number of people that died, yet when you Google Batman SH, Batman shooting appears even before Batman shirts. Our fixation with such relatable details is the key to internalizing others' story and allow it to have an effect on our own lives. When an event takes place that shatters the lives of those affected, by allowing it to infiltrate our own minds and hearts, we are allowing it to have an impact on our own life. Now, a skeptic would say, why bother doing this? Why try to break down these walls that protect us from the flood of daily emotions and tragedies that humans experience? I can tell you I've personally tried to live the life of a skeptic and found that it leads to a cold world of isolation and the suppression of those very qualities of creativity and curiosity that make us so humanly vulnerable and interesting. Now, while it may be impossible to experience every daily tragedy that occurs, what matters is that we do focus on the sharp details that can be triggered unexpectedly and allow them to infiltrate us a little bit. Now, all of these general appeals to humanity aside, the most simple and most compelling reason I can give you for caring is because it will happen to you someday. Now, the events that shatter your life will be different from mine, different from those you hear about on the news. No amount of preparation will prepare you for them. But to endure tragedy is a fundamental human experience, regardless of your belief as to the root of this tragedy, or why there's such a discrepancy between the different kinds that people experience throughout their lifetime. Now, most of us will lose family members. Some of us might lose close friends at a young age. Others of us will suffer from devastating diseases. Each of these stories may not be unique in that somebody has experienced something similar, but the individual impact and details of such events cannot be ignored. Let me share with you a few examples from my own experience. Contrast what I'm about to say to a news article, and more importantly, consider not which of these might make the best headline, but which of these maybe strikes that chord within you and might stick around long enough to provoke some serious thought. So it was July 27th, 2008, and a man named Jim carried a Remington Model 48 12-gauge shotgun into a musical performance of Annie Jr. that was being performed alongside the regular Sunday sermon. The other performers and I, when the first shot rang out, assumed that a mic had blown or something had fallen on stage. Upon realizing what was actually occurring, the children and I ran outside and began sprinting across the grass to the parking lot. Now, the most distinct feeling I have in that moment was panic. But not panic at the events that were occurring inside, because my brain hadn't wrapped around that yet. But panic at the fact that I was 13 and running through thick, wet grass in high heels, and therefore had every expectation of falling on my face. I recall crouching behind a yellow VW Beetle, that moment of indescribable relief when the first part of my family came out the back door. I remember nothing of the drive home that day, except that we stopped at a gas station, and somebody handed me a cherry icy that sat motionless in my lap, melting as the weight of the day's event began crashing around me. And the day after the shooting, a memorial service was held at the church down the street. Hundreds of people packed into this tiny church, lit candles, and listened to other speakers. To be honest, most of that night is a blur to me as well. But I do recall a single distinct snapshot I captured while standing on the stage looking out. It was the end of the vigil, and the other cast members and I were on stage singing "The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow." And while we were off key and out of sync, I don't think I will ever again experience the capacity of the raw emotions of hope and despair that I did in that moment. So this is my biggest life-shattering event, the singular experience I can point to that has impacted my life the most up until now. And to be honest, I didn't handle it very well at first. I tried to overcome it by playing it tough, by pretending it had no real impact on me. I told a few of my closest friends in a very matter-of-fact way, dealt with the rest of it silently, and tried to ignore it whenever possible. Now, that phase came with a lot of long nights, a lot of silent pain, and a lot of lying to myself. It also didn't help that I was entering my early teenage years and already cultivating that idea that my parents just didn't get me, and therefore refused to talk about it with the few people that actually had a conception of what I had experienced. Nor could I dump it on my friends at the time, because I found them caught up in the daily terrors of middle school, and therefore had no way to dump such a heavy topic on them. So I kept it in. Eventually, in high school, I began admitting to myself that it was an experience that had happened, but one with no real significance. And then I came to college. And here it was I had the opportunity to rechange myself, to create a new identity, and all those other cliches we've heard a million times. But before beginning that, I started reconsidering the fundamental parts of myself and my history that had created the person that I was shaping in this new setting. I was also in a first-year seminar called The Politics of Good and Evil, and I began truly cashing out for the first time the effect that the shooting had had on my life. My final paper and presentation in that class was sort of a culmination of this self-reflection, one that also touched upon the moral philosophies I've developed as a result of my experience. But beyond that, I found that opening myself up to that classroom of people, of allowing myself that vulnerability, was more meaningful than any conversation I had at the time of the shooting. Speaking about it was my release, and although today is a slightly larger scale than a simple class presentation, that same relief is running through me now. So, speaking publicly about a very personal story that most of my closest friends have never even heard, as a release, I imagine most of you are thinking that that sounds crazy and the complete opposite of anything you would want to do. And that's exactly my point. Just as my tragedy is different from yours will be, so is the release that I seek. And just as there's no way to anticipate the events that will occur to you throughout your lifetime, there's also no way to anticipate what you will seek to make sense of it, which can make it pretty hard to deal with sometimes, and very hard to watch somebody that you care about go through it themselves. Because here's another secret. Beyond just experiencing such events yourself, at some point you'll probably also have to watch somebody you care about go through their own tragedies. And unfortunately, there's no quick answer I can give you for how to help them. Nothing Google can spit out at you in 0.24 seconds. The best advice I can give you is to reach out, to reinforce your availability, to repeat yourself, to not assume that you understand how they felt, but to presume that you still have the ability to make a difference and help in small ways. Ask them about the details of their story and allow them to strike that chord within you. Also, just a fair warning, it's probably going to take a little more than an 8-second attention span to be able to connect to that human in front of you. Hopefully, my talk today has provided you with a few examples of ways that you might be able to make that connection. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about something that my dad and I created a few years ago. Things were starting to get emotional as I was getting ready to head off to college out of state, and then get a job and head down the adult path of life. So one day we prompted a discussion about loving somebody and losing them and how to deal with that pain. And a phrase was coined that we still use to this day. Now the phrase is going to sound a little morbid, fair warning. The phrase is, I love you and you're going to die. And while it is morbid, as I said, getting past the initial shock, I think it gets at some ideas that are fundamental to this discussion today. By opening ourselves up to somebody who is as vulnerable to tragedies as we are allowing ourselves to be affected by another person's life. We are recognizing in them this vulnerability and this sense that they too will experience shattering events, and simultaneously recognizing our own chance of having these happen and need to be understood by our fellow man. I love you, and you're going to die. But more importantly, before that, you're going to live. And living means pain and lack of understanding. Moments that will test your strength and your courage and your hope for the future. And sometimes you'll go through these moments feeling alone. And sometimes you'll have to watch somebody you care about go through these moments feeling as though they're alone. I've been on both sides of that fence, and I honestly can't tell you which one is harder. But I can tell you that if you find yourself in that first situation, of feeling as though nobody can really understand what you went through, the answer is they can't. But that doesn't mean that they can't still connect with you and share that darkness with you and eventually they'll start to see your light. And if you find yourself in that second situation of watching somebody you care about go through one of these events, just remember that you do have the ability to connect with them and make a difference in small ways. I'm going to end my talk today with a relevant quote to this topic that comes from my favorite novel, Catch-22, by Joseph Heller. The quote is, "He was never without misery and never without hope." To me, this symbolizes the balance that exists in our life between happiness and tragedy, the inescapable reality that there will be moments that come along and shatter us. But it's equally important that we remember the details, grab onto them, retell them, and in our own off-key way, sing about how the sun will come out tomorrow, because the sun will come out tomorrow. Thank you.